is Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy, the art of attracting, acquiring, and retaining talent. Here's Kathleen.
My guest this week is Eileen Rogers, the founder of One Creative View, an executive coaching firm that works with entrepreneurs who are ready to transform themselves and their businesses. As an entrepreneur, Eileen built and sold a successful, award-winning, multi-million-dollar marketing and printing company, and now she's on a mission to grow more courageous and daring leaders. Eileen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And you and I have known each other for a very long time and know that in today's world, it's not unusual for our young people to forgo a traditional corporate career path and really to take on those entrepreneurial dreams when they're in their 20s. But you and I, we kind of opted for a corporate gig and maybe dreamt of becoming an entrepreneur, but you didn't do that. So I would like to start by having you tell us your story about how you pursued that dream and the evolution of this entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. I'll try and make it short from the perspective of what I thought I was going to do and what I ended up doing. I grew up in Wisconsin, and we didn't come from a family that had a lot, so I got creative early. I had to find my own way through college, had 18 jobs. I was pretty creative in terms of how I was able to do that. And when I finished college, I had a marketing and business degree. I thought I would head to Arizona, where I had some contacts, and go to Thunderbird. My big dream and goal was, as you said, to work for a corporation. But my real intention was to travel while I worked, because I had spent 8 months in Europe and just the world opened up to me. I knew I loved to travel, so I wanted to create something. So I'd go to Thunderbird, I'd get an international marketing degree, work for a massive big company, and get transferred to an international location, which never happened, thank goodness. By the time I left for Arizona after I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with $500 and everything that I owned, and no real plan. When I think back on it now, it's almost embarrassing. Lots of hope, but no plan. And I was starting to run out of money. My friend here said, you need to have your resume printed. You can't have a copy. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I've been getting turned down for insurance jobs and all kinds of things because, of course, I found out how much it costs to go to Thunderbird and knew that I had to work first. Well, there was a little printing company down the road, and I walked in and essentially never left. I ended up doing what most people don't have the patience or the capacity for right now. Is kind of the American dream. The guy who printed my resume turned out to be the owner, and we created a sweat equity earn-in possibility for me. So if I could help him build the business to a certain degree, I'd earn a portion of it. I had some pricing that was set up, and it took me 13 years to buy him out and head out on my own. And I've never looked back, and I realize to this day that that was my path. I could not have worked for other people, and probably in that corporate environment, I don't think I would have been a good fit. So that started, it was actually a franchise organization. We were the only organization west of the Mississippi River. And I hadn't gone through franchise training for marketing or printing or anything. I had my business degree, which didn't teach you a whole lot about how to operate in business, as you know. How do you deal with irate customers? How do you do lots of things that you just sort of stumble your way through? So in that 38 years of having the company, I ended up buying out my first partner in after 13 years, and then swearing I'd never have another one again. I did much later in my career. And we were partners for 12 years, and he was my buyout and exit plan. So 38 years altogether, and it was evolution of our business and how we do business, and for me as a leader. So I knew I had this planned buyout. And so in 2011, I started my company, One Creative View, knowing that I needed a next career. What do I want to do? And did some transition coaching with my coach and explored. And so I began to figure out, what do I enjoy here? Is it consulting? Is it facilitating? Is it coaching? What is all this? And where can I have an impact and make a difference? And 3 years ago, we finished the buyout, and this is where I am today.
Well, and thank God you are, because you've certainly been instrumental in the evolution of our business over the last couple of years. I do think it's interesting, I had to chuckle when you said you had no plan and lots of hope. I think that was a great strategy back in those days. I laugh about the same thing. There was no business plan. It was survival of the fittest. We had bills to pay, and I didn't have time to put a strategic plan together.
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because for many, many years, I think I felt like an imposter and actually even had some shame around the fact that I didn't have a set business plan, because that meant it must be on paper, it must be all laid out and pretty and whatever I thought should business plan is. And in fact, both you and I had plans in our head. We just didn't formalize them, I would venture to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the great stories that we can share with other young entrepreneurs, that you don't necessarily need to have that bright and shiny strategic plan.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the work that you do with leadership teams and the Enneagram, specifically as a guide on our journey towards self-awareness and really just the whole improvement of team dynamics. And as I talk to people about our journey at Duffy Group with the work that we do with you and the use of the Enneagram, I'm often surprised how few people are familiar with the Enneagram. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with it, can you tell us a little bit about the tool and maybe how it differs from other assessment tools?
Sure. I was introduced by one of my executive coaches years ago. And it wasn't in the formalized way that you and I worked together with a report, but it truly was around this idea of self-awareness. And the Enneagram assessment breaks everyone into 9 archetypes. And what's unique about the Enneagram, which isn't, I think, as much, there's lots of great assessments out there. And this is just the one that I personally feel offers the most to people, both personally and professionally, and it's been really impactful in my life. So I've been able to experience the difference. But there are 9 archetypes, and each of us operates with some core motivation. And when we were young, we put together strategies, essentially first on who do I need to be, how do I need to show up to survive, and who do I need to be, how do I need to act in order to feel cared and loved. And this starts when we were just born. We were trying to look around and interpret our world. And over time, those 2 important strategies simply turned into habits and patterns of thinking, feeling, and action. And this idea of self-awareness is, if I can understand those things more about myself, if I can be more present, then perhaps I can show up not as this sort of reactive default human, but I can show up much more intentionally. I can show up more often as my best self, and not reactive, but maybe responsive. And so I believe the Enneagram is the most useful path. It's a journey, right, for the rest of our lives. And there's so much depth to it. There are subtypes and lots of other elements that go with it. I really appreciate how much your organization has been able to go to that next level with it, because I think real change and awareness is possible when you do that.
Well, and it's interesting. I was thinking about this over the weekend too, as I was at a conference last week, and there was a legendary pro athlete who was sharing his experience with a different assessment tool. And And the words that I wrote down as he was speaking were, it was a transformational experience. And for him, it, both personally and professionally. And one of the things that he talked about was some of the things that we all learn about ourselves that we don't necessarily like. Mm-hmm. And, how do you help folks see the positive? Because that's something we've all talked about in our organization. There are pieces of my number 2 that I don't particularly care for, but you've been able to talk through that and help me understand the positive between some of those. But maybe tell us a little bit about how you help others with that.
Yeah, I think the best way to talk about what you're getting to is those are simply blind spots for us. And the Enneagram, the best gift it is sort of a look inside our own individual operating system. And things like blind spots or these habits that maybe we created for a really good reason when we were young don't help us as much when we're older. But they were for good reason. And so having an open heart and an open mind when you go through your Enneagram profile and type is really important. And I try to emphasize that with people. This is not about this is right, this is good, this is bad. That's not really the perspective to use this as a helpful tool. Most of us are present about 2 to 4% of the day. And the rest of the time, we just operate on this autopilot. And that's why your Enneagram type and profile is sort of your default person. That's who's going to show up if you're not mindful. So you can see the challenge for most of us. 2 to 4% of the time, we're present. The question is, what could be possible if we were present 6 to 8% of the time, or 7 to 10% of the time? It's incremental, right? This is not about perfection by any means, because we are all beautifully imperfect. Mm-hmm. And perfectionism isn't healthy striving anyway.
Well, and I think the other piece to this that is very helpful is if we're only present for that, nanosecond of the day, right?
Yes.
One of the things that you have helped us with is not only to understand ourselves, but to understand the other types. So that as we are having conversations with people, that we can understand where they may be coming from and plan our communication. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but in such a way that it is received and that we're both parties are more present in that conversation. And ultimately, I guess where it gets back to improving the overall team dynamics.
Mm-hmm. I think probably the biggest takeaway, if you get involved within the Enneagram work, is the fact that there are 9 different types. And so this idea of being able to communicate well, the odds of you getting it right are about 1 in 9 if you're just your default self. And so understanding other people's type, I think, does 2 things. It gives you a place to start so that you can recognize that, that person didn't do it how you would have done it, or they didn't say it in the way that you would have done it, right? That there are natural differences that we forget when we're not present. And then we make up a story about it and we believe it. So understanding somebody's type gives you the opportunity to have more empathy. It also, I think, creates an opportunity for better communication. This George Bernard Shaw said the challenge with communication is the illusion it's taken place. Mm-hmm. And how often do we all leave conversations thinking we were entirely and totally clear, only to find out later that maybe it didn't work that way. So having some empathy. And then the other part of this is also coming from a place of generous assumption that somebody didn't say that just to irritate the heck out of us, right? That's just who they are. And so that combination of generous intention around what they're doing and empathy gives us a better place to build from.
Yes, yes. So we talk a lot about recruiting since that's what we do over here at Duffy Group. And it's a crazy market still in the recruiting market. And, a lot of companies don't necessarily have the luxury anymore to focus on looking at just the candidate's hard skills. So can they do the day-to-day responsibilities? Are they going to be able to drive revenue, or have they driven revenue? I mean, obviously, those hard skills have to be a piece of that. But now there's a lot more emphasis on the soft skills. Can people think creatively? Can they work collaboratively? Are they problem solvers? Can you talk about the Enneagram and the assessment tools and how employers can use these things to understand the candidate's soft skills and not necessarily as a knockout? I think that sometimes, I work with clients and they're like, oh, well, they didn't hit a fill in the blank on this assessment tool, and so they knock them out. I think it's just another piece of data. But how do you advise leaders on how to use this information in the recruiting process?
That's a great question. And actually, you may be surprised, but we don't recommend that you use the Enneagram as a hiring tool. The best use for it is once that person is on your team, to help them grow with self-awareness, to think about fit. We used to say that we hire on competence, right? Those hard skills, but we part ways on fit. And so using the Enneagram as part of your onboarding process, there are a lot of ways you can incorporate it there for that person to feel connected and belonging, to create psychological safety, and just to begin to take some of the guesswork out and identifying how they might be more successful within your organization based on what they know about themselves. And if the organization, like yours, Kathleen, has everybody identified, it makes it a whole lot easier for them to approach and take some of that guesswork out. I used to underestimate all the time. When I hired new people into my company, I was thinking, gosh, I'm going to get all kinds of new information and this is going to be great. And what I realized was most people spent their first few months just trying to fit in. And so to build a high-performing and strong team, there's a lot of information in this report in particular around communication, around decision-making, around management styles and conflict. There's a lot of room for all of us to grow if we know kind of where to start from.
And I think one of the things what is interesting that one of my folks just implemented with you as we've been expanding our back office was to set up time just with you to have the two of them learn about each other's communication style, their management style, almost like marriage preparation, right? And in any kind of a relationship is how can you learn more about each other to maybe avoid tripping up.
Yeah, and even if it's not to avoid tripping up, it's understanding after the fact that, gosh, we're different. And so we did spend time talking about what are blind spots? How do you process information? How do you like to work with this? And it's really helpful to have those kinds of managed conversations where people can show up and be brave and talk about, okay, somebody can facilitate. What do we think might go wrong? And how will we handle that if that comes up? So, yeah, it is a tool also for individuals to drill down with someone that they work with or spend a lot of time with. There are even Teams reports, as you've seen in the past, where you have a team profile. Literally, your team is a type Enneagram X. So with that kind of team, what do you need to do to ensure that feelings are here? Or maybe it's a processing kind of team. There's a lot of dimensions in terms of even making decisions and strategic planning. There are many ways to leverage the Enneagram if you go all in, as you have with your organization.
Well, I think the other thing that's been really fun is through this evolution is that when we looked at the diversity, or at this, when we first started, really lack of diversity, right? Most of the people were like me. We had a lot of type 2s. Now, as we have been expanding, we have a very diverse, we have representation, multiple representation in all types. And that just makes for an even better organization.
It makes for a better organization, and at the same time, it creates more challenges from the standpoint of we need people to be really present, right? Because now there's even more differences than there were before.
And thank God they're not all like me anymore.
Well, when you think about that, even when I went back to my organization and I would hire people as I stumbled my way through getting better at that in my career, we do tend to hire people that we connect to. So we hire people like us in a lot of cases. Like you said, there's an incredible advantage to having diverse perspectives on your team. And you have to work at making sure that they all speak up and they're all heard and recognized.
Yes, definitely. Well, Eileen, there's so much more we have to get to, but we have to take a break. Coming up in the second part of my conversation with Eileen Rogers, the founder of One Creative View, Eileen weighs in on the subject of psychological safety.
There's a misconception that it's a place we get to and then we stay there. And literally every time somebody new joins an organization, you kind of start over. And that challenger safety is where the innovation, where the creativity and everything happens. So I think that's important to realize that it's an ongoing process, the psychological safety.
This has been Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy. To connect with Kathleen or to learn more about recruitment research, go to duffygroup.com.